usual day when we are driving from Porto till here, we are using cars. So that means we are releasing carbon to the atmosphere. We are just and trees are able to once again take carbon from the atmosphere and transform it in sugars by the photosynthesis process and keep it for well, it depends, but quite for a long period, at least much longer than products resulting from agriculture. So forests, because of the gap of time period between plantation and cutting trees, can sequester carbon, and that's quite a useful natural tool for scientists, not to change, but at least to reduce one of the main causes that is related with climate change. So it's not a solution, but it's something that is allowing scientists to try to get more powerful solutions. So it's giving us this. Well, how is forest in Portugal? Sorry, because this is in Portuguese, but anyway, it's quite a challenge, at least for people from Spain. Let's try to translate that Portuguese word. How is forest in Portugal? I'd say it's very simple. So that's one of the main reasons for wildfire occurs. We have forest is extremely important in terms of area. So almost 40% of the Portuguese area is actually forest. But if you had forest with shrubs land, the percentage of area is here. And lots of times about forest, we are not thinking about trees. The management of shrublands is also extremely important in this context. So what I want to say is it's really huge percentage in a context where climate is quite challenging. All the Mediterranean area has a fire, has a natural resource, has a natural element that we need to learn how to manage, how to deal with it. In terms of species, you were driving from here, if I'm not wrong, and you have realized that it's quite simple. It's Portugal, and the color is represented for with colors all in Portugal. One color for the eucalyptus stand in literal, one color for the pinus stands, mainly one species, Pinus pinasta, mainly in the north interior and mainly in the center of Portugal, where really huge, amazing wildfires has occurred last summer, and one color for Quercus super, for oak tree, where Portugal is the main producer in Portugal. This species is strongly related with agriculture if we are thinking that vineyards and wine production is because cork oak is used in the bottle of wine. This is, but not only, also to produce clothes for ladies and bags for ladies and lots of design products, while cork is extremely important, and it's a very, very interesting ecological events are the most ecological part of the forest in Portugal. I'd say pines and eucalyptus stands are really more higher productive, more intense, with more challenges when we are dealing with this topic, with fire, with natural resources preservation. And so we need to reflect a lot. Well, he's trying to introduce in a first stage main in the presentation to give idea about the importance of forest ecosystems. I'm a forest engineering and I love what I'm doing. I'm also a landscape architecture, and in the hand I want to show agriculture people that we are brothers, that we are dealing with very similar ecosystems, even if, for instance, temporal gap scales are quite different. For agriculture engineering, 1 year is the maximum of the temporal gap period. In the hand of 1 year, lots of productions can be get. In forest, no. For instance, for the pinus, which is considered a very high intensive species pinus, I'm not talking about eucalyptus, but for a pine, I need 45 years between plantation and cutting. 45 years, which means I can't fail, because there's such a huge gap of time that temporal scale is different. Of course, as a landscape architecture, I'm dealing with a landscape that will not be changing drastically for this period of time. But anyway, connections between agriculture and forestry, as we consider extensive small farms in Portugal, I would say farmers are mainly focused on agriculture, but of course forest is important for them because they have the worst soils, parts that they don't need to be so much intensively careful about that areas, but where they can use it for forest and where they can get some money in periods very specific. Imagine that they will be marrying one of her sons. They need extra money, and lots of times they are just selling the forest, the trees, to get that extra money and to have sometimes they are not managing forests in a professional way, but anyway important not only in an ecological perspective but also because they can give them some money without any kind of care for that land. Of course, my perspective is different. I think we can the ecological and the economical importance of forests if we are managing it using science, using economics, and so investigating it. So at this first stage, I want to show you the ecological importance of forests. About a variable which is a K variable when you are dealing with urban dynamics, which net primary production, NPP. NPP means all the production of the ecosystem. So it's quite difficult to measure. We need to get at least a period of 1 year, because I need to measure the production of the ecosystem, all the production, not only the tree components, but also the shrub components, not only the above ground, but also the below ground. So that means we need to talk a lot with different specialists in the agrarian, with the agrarian background. For instance, I need to get a huge background in terms of ecophysiology, also with soil. So let's try to talk a little about MPP. So we need to, there are two approaches to quantify carbon sequestration. One is supported with ecophysiological studies using flux towers, which are really, really expensive. Even if for Europe there's a network of flux towers across all Europe, for instance, in Portugal there's only 2 towers, which means it's quite difficult to use it for this kind of studies. So there's a different approach. Even as a forester, I was teaching forest mensuration, so I was teaching my students how to use dendrometric instruments to measure a tree. Imagine that you are a tree. I want to measure your height, your volume, your biomass, and there's instruments. And using this traditional biomass quantification. Okay, so that's what we have been done during the previous, I'd say, 10 years in Villarreal, and looking for mainly the forest areas in the north of Portugal. The methodology can change from one approach. There's more than one approach. I was using a methodology that was comparable. It was defined by a team from Wisconsin University, north of America. You will understand why. It's very easy. The team told me, please, you need to establish sampling plots. You need to measure at least 3 components of the forest stand: the tree, the arboreal component, the shrub component, and the litter fall component. You need to get measurements with a gap of time at least of 1 year, but 1 year could be a problem if that year is atypical, if it's too dry or too hot, or so if the climate for a certain reason is typical, is not so normal, that means that measurement is not correct. It's related with that abnormal behavior. So as longer as the period could be, the average would be representing a much more supported, a much more coherent approach. Anyway, I need to establish, I need to measure all the trees, I need also to measure shrubs, and also I need to measure litter. I need to understand a little, it's not difficult. As a forest student with 3 years of graduation, in the end of this process, is really able to do all these measurements. But anyway, he needs to be able to manage also a little with modeling. Because when I'm teaching modeling to my students, I'm playing a little with physical variables for a human. Because if I'm understanding the process for in an easy way, I'm immediately able to translate it for a tree. Imagine that I want to get my height based on the measurement of my feet. If I'm using Excel in a very, very easy way, I can probably connect both measurements. And if I had time enough, I just file, ask for half of this measurements of feet and your height, and in the hand I could create a mathematical model estimating height based on only in my feet information. So the same for trees. What I'm saying is I want to get biomass values based, for instance, in very, very easy variables of the trees, like the diameter at the breast height, which is a well-known tree figure. So lots of times the biggest problem using this approach is that biomass models are not available for a wide range of species. But as in Portugal we have mainly 3 species, that's probably not a huge problem for Portuguese forest context. Anyway, this is just first that I found for the stands, because we are as important ecological forest species, and I want to show you, even in this context, the amount of carbon sequestration or the increase of biomass that we are able to get is quite huge. If you imagine an hectare, 100 is 14 tons by year. Okay, and divided by these components. The arboreal component has a strong importance, but of course, because I'm mainly focused on carbon sequestration, it's not biomass. That's my key point of view. It's much more the amount of carbon that is related with this increase of biomass. Of course, studies are telling us that approximately 50% of dry biomass is carbon. But if we assume that there's probably more precise values, we assume that exactly 50% in the hand, we could be able to say that in the hand, almost, well, not far from 50%, but 1 hectare of eucalyptus stand is able to sequester more than 6 tons of carbon by hectare, by year, in north of Portugal. These figures are not close, are not far from values across all over the world for forest ecosystems. Anyway, there are lots of interesting studies for agriculture cultures. The only problem for agriculture is that it's the gap of time. So, because we are producing cultures, the carbon is sequestered by your productions is of course very, very short compared which in Portugal I'd say at least 10-15 years will be there stopped with no changes, just there in the tree. Well, time is important. There's a huge, as I told you, at least 1 year, and this is not the only approach that I have to do this kind of studies. There are also ecophysiological models, which could be mainly important when we are dealing with climate change, because usually for these ecophysiological models, I'm just trying to simulate photosynthesis. So that means climate, and usually one of the key inputs for this kind of models. and that means I can play with different climate change scenarios to understand in which way and how intensively they are affecting photosynthesis, so carbon sequestration dynamics. So I will be able to understand how different climate change scenarios could be influencing things across all over. It's quite interesting and it's quite a powerful tool. We understand why I was using an American approach for fieldwork measurements, and also later why we were mainly focused on some and we will be able to understand the process well. Lots of studies have been done using all of this. Some climate change scenarios are being presented all over the world, and of course I was mainly worried with the ones for the Mediterranean areas are representing areas where scientists are mainly worried because of the drastic changes that are predicted for this region, with rain, with hotter periods, with finding even more drastic and more problematic. So important areas to study, like Greece, the same. Well, Spain, Italy, Greece, and north of Africa. So if there are students from some of these regions, we need to mainly focus on topics because our areas. So we were initially using a model called Forest PGC, which means mainly focused on forest. Later, this was the father of a new ecophysiological model called Biome BGC. Probably this is not the first time that you are listening about it. Why is this model so important? Just because NASA in 2001 has released a very, very interesting project called MODIS, M-O-D-I-S, MODIS. It's a free project. You can download free 44 products and using it in your research, in your interesting topics, even if you are not doing research, but it's covering all over the world. It's free and created to allow people, not only scientists, change all over the world. Okay, one of that 44 products is NPP maps. So that means I will have a map covering each part of the world, one image per year, and Biome BGC is the ecophysiological model used to produce that kind of information. So that means we were using it to compare our fieldworks, to validate it with our fieldworks, and additionally, we will be later using that MODIS NPP images to get at least 3 sources of information about the same topic, and also to show us the importance of forests in a context of carbon sequestration, of dealing with climate change, and also to understand dynamics across the world. So I will be showing you. Yes.
When you have like MODIS.
Yes.
And you more correct, or let us say, are your studies kind of the same like the MODIS system is giving you?
I'm not sure if I could understand, or well, if my answer will be, if my answer if will be focused on your doubt, but I think I understood. Probably you should ask me what's the special resolution of what is, because it's an image. It's like a square image, and I need to get dimensions of that square. It's one for the Morris NPP images. It's 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, and you need me how was the dimension of my sampling plot. It was very shorter, but theoretically, when I'm doing samples, I need a sample of all of it. Probably I shouldn't be the one use it as a model, because I'm in one of the distribution. I'm a bit skinny. Probably I shouldn't be using a person a little, well, the opposite of me. So I need to be sure that my sample was representative of area. So I need to relax at least, because when I'm doing a sampling plot, I know that pushing feeders using a representative area. But in the quite different figures using different methodologies could be compared for the same variable. In this case, the amount of carbon sequestered, NPP. Yes.
But well, the question is, are your sampling plots giving you the same information like MODIS? Is there
yes. Yes.
Do you get to the same number of how much NPP is produced in that area?
Yes. The variable is the same, the methodology is different, and of course the area that I'm focused on is very different.
Yeah. Okay.
So you say in practice, what would be obtainable?
In the hand,
Yeah.
I'm telling you the amount of carbon per hectare, per ton, the tons of carbon sequestered per hectare and per year. Well, the MODIS is showing me the average value of a square of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer.
Okay.
And I will be telling you a sampling plot covering or in the same square of the MODIS image, give be, for instance, using actual climate change, and and in the hand I will be acquiring NPP figures. So for the actual climate change context, but then I could use each one of the climate change scenarios. Imagine that scientists telling me that temperature, how much I will be able to change the input of temperature, increasing it, running biome BGC, trying to understand which was the impact on carbon sequestration. And I could be merging also with raining and mixturing with a mixture of these two factors. So it's quite interesting to say climate scenarios. Yes, well, I think running in the hand, it doesn't matter. I can give you, Carolina, my presentation, because I want to fulfill my time, and in the hand I want to give you a movie reflecting about Portuguese wildfires and merging all these things. Anyway, this was one of our papers, publication, if I'm not wrong, in forest ecology and management. So you can understand now I was using biome BGC just because the Wisconsin University was part of the NASA Morris teams. NASA is dividing products by each one of the most important American universities. Montana is responsible for Morris NPP product. University is responsible for Leaf Area Index for free, and you can download it, and you in different temporal and spatial resolutions depending on the product. I will propose you to use Google one of these days just to get information about the project. And BioBGC was the decay of ecological model. So that's why we were using this methodology. Just for you to understand, we are not changing temperature and not changing raining. In Portuguese, rain is pluviosidade, precipitation. Okay, so that's why we have been using. And carbon is the amount of CO2 at the atmosphere. So with no changes about the concentration of carbon initially available, temperature and precipitation. And changing it, carbon sequestration dynamics were changing. Of course, with a range of diversity. Well, what I was trying to show you is that we are dealing with quite a complex challenge system, and we don't know yet lots of things. There are lots of gaps of information, which means we still need we still need to do a huge effort for all while a platform for us to sell this information, get it from fieldwork measurements in order to validate. In the hand, what I forest, of course, is a very powerful factory for carbon sequestration. There are measurements across the world that we can be used at least to validate, to understand if we are too far from what is obtained worldwide. We have now some key information about carbon dynamic for different species in Portugal, and in the hand, I want to reflect a little. So why sometimes we have the approach that forest is not a key factor when we are fighting wildfires. The most stressful comments that I'm hearing from forest fighters is that, of course, I know that my house, my life, the life of my kids and my family is the most important component in a wildfire context. But of course, these ecosystems are extremely important for biodiversity, for in a context of carbon sequestration, and not only. So it's quite such a dense ecosystem that I think we need to show every people that forest is extremely important, and that a wildfire should be fighted inside the forest, looking for forest as being extremely important. So I will be showing you a very interesting, and it's a very short movie, and it was produced by two fantastic people living in the center of Portugal and working in the interior of Portugal. and they were so stressful, so stressed with the last wild forest fires that they have created a project called 15 Minutes of Fire Memories, and they are releasing 15 movies showing us stories that of people who have lived inside that huge Portuguese wild. Speaking in Portuguese anyway, you will be able to understand it because there are legends in English. I'm not sure if he's here, but
Bom, são imagens um bocado de filme de terror, não é? Eu estava em casa, tinha acabado de chegar de uma operação, tinha feito uma operação, estava com um bebê, o meu marido e os meus filhos andavam a tomar conta do ouvido, ou seja, é do lado de lá, já noutra povoação, mas é relativamente perto, mas supostamente seria lá que ia arder, porque de 10 em 10 anos essa parte arde sempre. E nós já estamos mais ou menos habituados sempre aos tratores, a sistemas. Ou seja, eu fiquei descansada em casa, entre aspas, não é? E ia sempre 5, 10 minutos, vinha cá fora ver. Vi que havia perigos, que havia clarões longe, mas não fiquei muito preocupada que viesse aqui, nem pensei sequer que viesse aqui. Entretanto, eu deitei-me e a minha casa, em poucos minutos, deu uma estremeção muito forte, como se fosse um tremor de terra. Isso foi um alerta e eu escuto e não estava. Entretanto, não foi alguma coisa. Eu não tinha saído de casa, não tinha conseguido sair a tempo com o bebê, não conseguia. Eu quando saí no portão e o fogo anda mais do que eu, as bolas caíam à minha frente. Eu fui um bocado às não vi o caminho, consegui fugir. No meio da povoação já havia muitos focos de incêndio, casas até volutas a ver, ou seja, alguém me salvou, alguém me tirou do carro, do outro lado, a salvar o ouviu, vinham a casa buscar mangueiras e já não passavam, a casa já estava completamente a arder. E quando fugi, já estava tudo a arder. Eu já não sabia, quer dizer, não havia, eu pensei como é que está a arder o céu, porque não há vegetação aqui, não há, está limpo, ali atrás estava minimamente limpo, como é que está tudo a arder desta maneira? É impensável. O fumo era denso, já denso. Eu não conseguia já respirar. Eu tive a certeza que ia morrer, mas já estavam todos mortos. Eu tive essa noção. Eu, no fundo, disse para o meu pequenino, olha, nós vamos ficar aqui porque vai ter uma bola em cima do carro. Mudou muito, mudou tudo. Para já perdi tudo. Tudo que levámos uma vida inteira a construir, não só nós, mas a parte dos meus sogros que nos ajudaram sempre. Nunca fizemos grandes empréstimos, quase nada, para termos o que tínhamos e agora não temos nada. Temos casa, não temos agricultura, poucas coisas temos, O leite temos que o vender muito mais barato do que até eu própria já o comprava. E não tenho nada, se quiser começar a fazer um queijo, não tenho nada, não tenho volta, não tenho uma forma, não tenho rigorosamente nada. Na queijaria perdi tudo, ora seja as máquinas, tudo o que diz respeito à feitoria do queijo, desde o início ao fim. E, ora bem, as máquinas de lavar, as câmaras frigoríficas, os lavatórios, que são caríssimos, as vitrines, as registadoras, balanças. Isso foi o que mais nos doeu e continua a doer porque nós perdemos. A história do bisavô, nós tínhamos chocalhos de prata que ninguém tinha, nós tínhamos mantas que ninguém tinha, nós tínhamos toalhas de linho, de renda, aquelas coisas que levávamos, que os miminhos que levávamos para as entrevistas, quando as velhas iam ao lado, de algum lado. Eu já tinha visto tudo, estava tudo ali. Quer dizer, aquela história que me foram dando, as ferradas antigas, tudo que era antigo. Ou seja, do antigo ao moderno, desapareceu tudo. Não temos nada. Muito triste, muito complicado neste aspecto. Acho que, para já, nós tínhamos aqui Vila Franca, entre Vila Franca, Póvoa, Seixo, uma mancha florestal espetacular. Não vamos mais ter nunca. Tudo desapareceu. Os meus pinheiros tinham 100 anos, eu tinha ali pinheiros. Fomos tirando para dar uma margem de segurança que não valeu de nada. Tínhamos ali espécies que estávamos a preservar, desapareceu tudo. Por isso, não vai haver pinheiros mansos, não vai haver floresta, vai haver o quê? Mato para arder. Daqui por 10 anos temos tudo a arder deste lado e daqui por outros anos temos tudo a arder daquele. E não vamos conseguir. Aqui as nossas terras não vão ter mais a beleza que tinham. Embora tudo possa ficar verde, mas nada vai ser igual. Os velhos nunca viram nada assim, nós também não, mas as crianças já viram, não é? As crianças já viram, já passaram por esse pesadelo, muitos ter que fugir de casa sem nada, ouvir os gritos e o fumo e tudo a gritar. O futuro para mim, acho que se as crianças forem crescendo neste meio, muitos acabam por sair daqui, não... Mas eu acho que era justo recebermos uma ajuda, pelo menos para aquilo que nós perdemos, que foi muito, porque já estão sendo dos projetos que não temos o vida. Temos a solidariedade dos meus irmãos que estão na Suíça, no Luxemburgo, e sobrinho e amigos deles. Eu andava a pedir para sobreviver. Tenho uma filha na universidade, queria desistir. Isto é um bocado complicado. Enquanto isso não for feito, e agora com muitos a quererem desistir, que é o meu caso, se não me ajudarem, eu sou sincera, se me disserem, se as coisas estiverem muito difíceis, eu não vou fazer, eu desisto.
So there's more 14 movies showing us personal histories about problems that...
Eu sou Paula Lameiras, tenho 46 anos, sou quarta geração da queijaria Lameiras.
Unbelievable stories about how people live huge wildfires. So I'm just ending.
Quando eu botei como um gol, é só isso, nunca me esqueço.
That challenges are so great, are so huge that we really need to think about the future of all this region around Mediterranean and the importance of wildfires, how to manage forests, what kind of legislation should we think. Probably even the answer of the Portuguese government is not yet the most efficient one for this kind of challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Lopes. I think we have a present for you, Professor.
Yes.
If you could just wait a little bit. Luis will get it for you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay, so.
Present, but thank you so much for your help.
Thank you. So
This was made by the the students
fantastic.
from the University of Extremadura in Spain, but of course,
Fantastic.
as you know, it's another with
That's
version.
Yes. And cork oak is here.
Yeah.
So forest is merging with agriculture, as I told you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not at all.
Okay. So our next lecture will be a little bit different than the ones we've had so far. Our speaker won't be here physically. He will be with us virtually. His name is Nityokam Divine. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. He is the founder and managing director of the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. And he has over 15 years of experience in youth entrepreneurship, advocacy, and mobilization of youth interested in agriculture. He recently established the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network with countries in Africa, Asia, and North America. For the SDGs to be for youth to youth, he designed a program titled Africa for the SDGs training, where youth are trained together to comprehend and own the SDGs in their local languages. He has hands-on experience in training, developing, and managing youth projects within the EU and non-EU countries. So we will establish the connection now. Is the sound okay?
Yes, yes. Everyone, can you hear us? Yes. Ivan, can you hear us? Yes, you can talk. You are ready. No, you can hear us. No, you can start now.
Yeah. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to everyone.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We can
Just
hear
say
you.
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, is a technical fault, so okay, good. Yeah, first time the entire community, organizing committee, Luis, and an entire crew for inviting me to address you guys today. Yeah, the responsibility of saving the world that we live in lies in our hands as a generation, and it is pertinent that we take deliberate action to act against the imminent challenges to security and climate change. The SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the world leaders in 2015, seeks to address these challenges. However, we need to go beyond what the 17 goals say to see the community, the grassroots level, and engage people, especially farmers, women, small foods, who are at the receiving end of consequences of climate change. Are not immune to any nations on that agency to mitigate and adapt to the speedy changing conditions now or never. The evidence of extreme weather events such as drought, heat waves, sea level rise, leading to floods, increasing CO2 concentrations, and few of the numerous challenges associated with climate change, which has a direct impact on food security, consumption health, and our total existence on planet Earth. Agricultural development and food security are high on global policy agenda because of the increase of population rate and low productivity, which has intensified the pressure for natural resources like land, energy, and water, especially among developing countries. I give you reference at the you referred to the target 13.2 of climate action of the SDGs, which states integrate climate change measures into policy.
Ups. Lucho, no es tu micrófono el que está malo. No es tu micrófono el que está malo. No, no sé qué pasa. Really professional.
and is not immune to any nations on earth. The sheer urgency to mitigate and adapt to the speedy changing conditions is now or never. Evidence of extreme weather events such as drought, heat waves, sea level rise, leading to floods, the increased CO2 concentrations, and few of the numerous changes associated with climate change, which has a direct impact on food production and consumption, health, and non-total existence on planet. Agricultural development and food security are high on global policy agenda because of increasing population rate and low productivity, which has intensified the pressure for natural resources like land, energy, and water, especially among developing countries. So I refer you to target to integrate climate change measures into policies and planning. Again, this reality that ICYA was established in 2014. Process only based across the platform to share findings and seek advice for their practical projects. The main objective, which is to create awareness and concept for adaptation, reducing emission mitigation, and increasing food productivity in a sustainable manner. The role of youth in contributing towards a sustainable world is very important, particularly for agriculture. We are important in shaping socio-economic developments, end hunger, eradicate poverty, and building solid foundation for the world's future, especially at the critical moments in time. Raising youth awareness about CSA, which is climate and agriculture, will not only make us conscious of the existence of challenges related to agriculture and climate change, but will further give us the necessary information to mitigate climate change through and contribute to the adaptation of smart practices and enhancements of agricultural livelihoods. Building the knowledge and skills in CSA will enable youth to make positive contributions to their communities and nations. The aim of our work is to enable relevant stakeholders that actively engage in seeking solutions for a better and more sustainable increase in youth and people with disabilities whom we know can always make a difference and pave the environment. So for the complete examples, you can refer to my presentation. You see right there, and you see the presentation, the PowerPoint, where you find the very action. Good. So you see from Rwanda, from Ghana, from Mali, what they are doing on the ground to address climate action. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Good. For the Rwanda, they partner with SOS Village to educate young people on climate change impacts, tree planting activities, organizing academies. Then in Ghana, they established SDG clubs, especially capitalizing on and sustainable management. At the level of Mali, they were able to plant enough trees as to find some young people there carrying on environmental activities or academic. In Togo, at the level of policy framework, they were presented at the ACL, which is the African Climate Carbon Forum in Benin last year. In Ivory Coast, we were fortunate to visit the African Women Bank office headquarters in Abidjan, where we actually saw what our group is doing right there, in ensuring that they smart farms actually to see how they look at opportunity as not as a challenge. Right there in Zimbabwe, you see some lecture. That was lecture room. They were trying to educate 500 young people on what the SDG is all about, capitalizing on SDG 13, which is climate action. In Morocco, you find the coordinator right there with the UNIC, that's the United Nations Information Center Director, where they were able to train 250 young people on SDGs. In Pakistan, you can find it there. Now, in Zambia, we have a program we call Agribusiness Incubation Program, where the team in Zambia were able to grow mushrooms in a much more sustainable manner, looking at climate change as another challenge. That's kind of, they were able to produce zero actively sustainably, looking at trying to ensure that the flooding, the floods, and the droughts don't actually impact their crops at the end of the day. In Nigeria, you find us there as well, carrying out the same stuff. So those are some of the key examples we are able to show here. And I think the delegates right there should be able to tap into this, and I'm ready to answer any question. So this addresses actually target B, which is to promote mechanism to raise capacity for planning and management. So my last paragraph says, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that we join forces in sustaining our world via little efforts in our various concerns to help solve this alright threat of climate change. We both individuals and collective roles to play, have collective roles to play. Our commitment to these roles, which the SDGs explains, to prepare us to win this climate battle so as to feed our world, end hunger, poverty, improve health, well-being, which are all linked to production. I would like to end here with this quote from this Sustainable Development Goal Global Festival of Action we took, I think in March, last month. We are the largest generation to save our planet, and the earlier we realize and take action, the better. It is all for us. And yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any questions from him about the project? Yes. There is one question. Can you come here,
yes.
Maybe? Oh, it's better.
Or maybe you can type the question.
Okay. I can speak now. Yes. Okay, Divine, hear me? Hello?
Yes, sure.
So I'm Wally, I'm from Nigeria.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Yeah, I'm Wally, I'm from Nigeria.
Okay, Wally from Nigeria, yes.
Yeah. So I've seen what you guys have been doing, but I have a question for you. African bureaucracy and the government in carrying out your activities successfully. Yeah, how have you been able to deal with the bureaucracy? Then some how would I call it? African government, in executing your projects, yes, in most African countries. Because I see that you have your projects in African countries. So I've been able to deal with that. Yeah, to really, because if you're able to do that successfully, I know you spread more, you have more wings to fly, and you're able to do more. So you're laughing, right?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Can I answer directly, Luis, who I get all the questions before responding to them?
What? Sorry? Yeah, maybe somebody has some questions.
So I answer directly, or I get all the questions and I respond to them? I respond to them.
Answer directly. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, Wally, thank you very much. I'm happy you mentioning the challenges you face in the continent, African continent. Yeah, I wish to underscore here that actually the bureaucracy, as you know, the politics will never be missing. It will always be there. But I think when you have a dream and a focus, you always get to meet. So concretely, we've been able to collaborate much more with some of the UN agencies at the level of Nigeria, where you are from. It's a unique. We actually pass through the UN system to be able to address this issue with the government. And secondly, last year I was in Nadi, attending a summit at the African where we were able to share parliamentarians, the African parliament. They had a meeting, so I was one of the speakers there. So I actually told them to pledge that they can support what we are trying to do, and they did that actually. That's why Nigeria is actually operational. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions? Something more about the state? Now we are preparing the partnership with have some breaks. We will let you know more about the details. If you can send us what you prepare
everything that you
The
paper and also the presentation. Well, I already have the presentation. I can share with them. So, but only like the thing that you prepare would be really great to have it.
Yeah, I sent it. I sent it to you on email just some few minutes ago. You have it. I sent it to you.
Okay, perfect.
I've sent my statement to you as well, my speech. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if there is not any other question, Celine.
No. I have a question if you're...
Okay, Celine from France.
Yeah. I have a question if the association is already in Europe, and how do you have the network active? How do you spread the knowledge, and how does the countries choose their group? Do they have all the freedom they want, or you guide them through the projects?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much, Celine. I'm happy for your question. It's very interesting as well. Yeah, I want to say here that actually I'm a public speaker, so I'm actually I always speak in very high level meetings. Just like in 2 weeks from now, I'll be in Rome, where I'll be meeting all the UN-based agencies in Rome. So, for example, to go straight to your question, when we meet in such big meetings, we try to discuss with some policymakers in X or W countries to tell them, okay, this is the idea we have, this is what we want to contribute towards the SDGs. And many of them buy the idea. Those who buy the idea, who buy in, they help us to establish it at their various countries. So right now we are trying to revamp the spirit in Germany. I was in Germany last year a couple of times, and I met the BMZ government. I mean the Ministry of BMZ. I met them, and we were very, very key to ensure that we try to establish this as well. So, and then in addition to what you're saying, I don't know whether you're part of it's one of the committee members, but we are actually signing a partnership and MOU with ICYA very soon. So perhaps next week or something to actually propel these activities across Europe and equally engage in exchange programs, students in Africa moving to Europe through the IAASWorld program, if it's possible. So I think those are some of the areas of concern ICE can actually tap in to ensure that we meet up with some of these bureaucracy and policy bottlenecks and all of that. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so, well, if we can give Divine an applause. Well, let's go to another activity. Thank you so much, Divine. So I'm going to disconnect you from here.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to have the deliberations of this meeting.
Thanks.
Okay, so Divine closed the first topic of this morning. We have a 15-minute coffee break now, so if you can go get some. University of, from the Faculty of Sciences of the University of Porto.
Good morning, all. Thank you for coming and for being here in a so nice city with so many things to visit, and you are going to hear them. Well, I will talk. I'm ecologist and soil ecotoxicologist, and I will talk about soil biodiversity and why we should care with it, and why it is important and urgent to protect this biodiversity. Well. Before this millennium, the biodiversity was completely neglected. I think that no one remembers on it, and no one was really concerned with the soil biodiversity. But we start to realize the problems that soils are undergoing and the main hazards that they are suffering. And in 2006, the European Commission published the thematic strategy. They published different thematic strategies related with different subjects, but one was dedicated to soil, and the aim was to protect the soil. And they identified several degradation processes that soils in Europe are undergoing. Of course, that is not only in Europe, but the concern were with the European soils. And they call our attention for the main problems, which include erosion, decline in organic matter content, local and diffuse contamination of soils, the sealing of soils, the compaction, the decline in biodiversity, salinization, floods, and landslides. And of course, that this is what interests to us today, but it is only one of the degradation process that the soil biodiversity is ongoing. And, sorry, related with soil biodiversity and with this publication with this strategy, the European Commission realized that it's necessary to make investments on the research about soil biodiversity, and the new framework program that was launched in that period, it was the 7th framework program, was specifically dedicated to soil biodiversity, since they realized that we don't know too much about this topic, and we need to characterize the soil biodiversity in European soils and to understand it if we really want to protect it. Well, but what we know is that, in fact, soil organisms are responsible for several functions in the soils. They maintain the soil structure, they regulate the hydrological cycle, they are responsible for gas exchanges and carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, soil detoxification, the composition of organic matter, suppression of pests. They are also source of foods and medicines. They establish several symbiotic and asymbiotic relationships with the plants, promoting the development and the growth of plants. And they also control, of course, the growth of plants. What is more interesting, if we forget the biodiversity of soils, in fact, probably you have heard to talk about all of these functions, and these are the functions of soils. But what happens is that the functions of soils are precisely the function of the soil's biodiversity. So biodiversity is in the bottom of all of these functions of soils. And the importance of these organisms is not new. Darwin has already called our attention before he published his main publication, which is related with the evolution of species. He was especially concerned with earthworms. He was interested in the role of earthworms in the soils, and one of his first publication is related with earthworms and with its function in the soils. Well, soil provides a great diversity of habitats and microhabitats and supports a great biomass of living organisms and of a great pool of genetic diversity of Earth. But despite that, we must understand, but why? Why the biodiversity in soil is so high? Because if you talk with someone that works on the sea, they will tell that the sea is the most diverse ecosystem of the planet. And if you talk with soil ecologists, they will say that it's the soil. So, but in fact, we know that the soil is a pool of a great biological diversity, but we need to understand why this happens. Let's start with the great diversity of soils that we have in the European Union only. You cannot see the legends, no problem, but if you look to the map, only to the colors, you can see that only in the European countries we have a great diversity of different types of soils, which is related with its geogenic origin. And it is estimated that we have at least different main types of soils within Europe. Different physical properties, different biodiversity. So it starts here, one of the reasons. Second, because if we look to the soil at the microscopic level, if we increase the amplification and we look to the soil at microscopic level, what we are going to see is that the soil is a complex, as a complex structure and a complex network of pores, spaces, interconnections between these spaces, and all of this creates microhabitats for different species. And more than this, it is a dynamic structure because the soil organisms contribute very much for the dynamism. They are always changing the structure and they contribute very much for always keeping this dynamic structure. And also, the soil is a semi-aquatic environment. Water is an extremely important element that composes the soil. It's also a component of the soil, and the presence of water is also extremely important for the survival of species that depend on water to live in the soil. And also, because what the soil, the properties of the soil, the species that grow different species grow about the soil, we determine also different physical species, and will determine the type of the community to these soils. This is based on what we assess by goals that is named defense precisely that the community that lives here is the community that evolved with the species that exist above ground and they are adapted to them. And we change these species, we change the properties of soils, the community. So now the great biodiversity. And we also have spot diversity in the soil. Where are these hotspots here? This is the plants is a region that is in the region of influence of the plants, where there is a great amount of organic carbon. It's a region rich in organic carbon, and where a complex community established of symbionts, of pathogens, of course, but it's a place of great diversity as well. All this diversity depending on the organic carbon that exists on this rhizosphere region. But, and we are sure that the organic carbon is extremely important. Why? Because if we go to extreme environments, like the dry values in the middle of the Antarctic continent, only, for example, only 3 species of nematodes were found here, no more. Is the place where the soil is more coarse, less diverse, a very reduced number of species can be found here. And why this happens? Because there are no organic carbon. The organic carbon is very limited to some lichens, to some algae that grow in the small lakes, and only to this. So the presence of organic carbon, the diversity of organic carbon also contributes for the biodiversity of soils. But well, these are all positive arguments, favorable arguments, but we have a negative one. That's if we think, probably you know this, the principle of quantitative exclusion that we learned in our first classes of ecology. This principle says that, okay, but when 2 species share the same ecological niche, they cannot survive together. One of them will be eliminated. And if we look to the soil, the niche is almost the same, because the source is the organic carbon, the decaying organic carbon. And all of these species depend on this source of energy. So why they survive there, and how, more precisely, how they survive there and how they coexist in the soil. And several authors have presented several models to explain this, but one of these models is probably the one that is most accepted to explain the diversity in soils is the facilitation model. That says, okay, they share the same resource, that is the decaying organic matter, but in different times. The first groups that colonize the soils, they prepare the quality of the organic carbon to the next ones, and so on. That is a succession of the tritivers, and this is how they can coexist and how they share, despite in sharing the same ecological niche. So there are a new explanation for the great biodiversity. Well, and the soils in our new millennium, the soils are becoming, even each day, are becoming a great concern. Several initiatives are being developed, and one of these initiatives, the Food Agriculture Organization of the United States is always involved in this initiative, of course. And in 2050, it was launched the International Year of Soils. And these years are created for what? For call the attention of all of us, scientists, no scientists, society, everybody needs to perceive that, and we have to deal with it. And several documents are prepared to communicate with the population, with society, and one of them was this one, where the FAO illustrates the main soil functions, which are completely different. And as I told you previously, if you look here, the soil organisms are involved in all of that. And we will specify a little bit more in 1 or 2 slides later. So these are the functions, and soil organisms are involved. And if we want to keep these functions, we must protect biodiversity. And why we want to keep these functions? Because these functions are responsible for delivering very important ecosystem services, like providing us food, fibers, providing us water with good quality for human consumption, controlling the climate changes, and so on. So this is why we really need to protect soil and the soil biodiversity. And to be more precise, how the organisms do this. And let's look only to the earthworms. Why earthworms? All of them are important. I'm only limiting to earthworms because the earthworms are considered the model species in the ecology and ecotoxicology studies related with soils. And if you look to them, we can start to divide earthworms into three different main groups. Epigeic, anasic, and endogeic. Which are the difference? The main difference of these functional groups is related with their burrowing capacity. If they live on the soil surface, or if they have the ability to burrow in the soil, and depending on this, they will have different roles in the soil. But of course, that I will not specify for each one, but what we need to see is precisely the relation of these species with the its functions and with the ecosystem services provided, to be more clear about what we have been discussing. For example, if we look to the composition of organic matter, which is one of the most important functions of the soils, because we need to decompose organic matter to recycle nutrients, the earthworms are not composers. They don't do the work of bacteria and of fungus, but what they do what we call comminution. They heat, they broke the great parts of the organic material in small parts, and they favor the colonization by bacteria and by fungi. So they promote the recycling of the organic matter, and they also even probably not more important, but also very important, is that they help, if they stimulate the work of the microbial community, they will stimulate also the degradation of pesticides, of contaminants that we release to the soils and that they need to be degraded. So with all of this decomposition work, they will contribute for the recycling the wastes and for detoxification, but they also will contribute for nutrient recycling. And if we look, for example, the ability of the special of these ones to burrow in the soil, they will contribute to provoke aeration of the soil, to open galleries, and all of this will contribute for soil water infiltration. And infiltration of water in the soil is extremely important, not only to provide water to plants, but also to filtrate the water, and while it is going to the underground reservoirs, the quality of the water is improving. And without entering in all of these details, you can see that, in fact, earthworms, with all of this work, they are contributing for the ecosystem services that it's what cares us. It's what we are concerned, because we need these ecosystem services to attain food, to survive, to the sustainability of the human species. And of course, at the end, this production to feed the world. You can then read it in more detail. It's very reading. And another example that probably you know very well are the plant soil feedbacks, and how they are really important, and how the biodiversity are extremely important for this. We can describe, I cannot describe because I'm not a plant physiologist, but you know, and probably better than me, that there are several relationships here that promote the release of signals to plants, molecules that are plant growth promoted. They understand it as these signals are transduced for stimulating mechanisms that will promote the growth of plants, all done by bacteria, fungi, and so on. But what we know also is the microbial community that lives here in symbiotic relationships with plants. Some of them are pathogenic to plants as well. Some of them try to affect the plants. But why they can be more or less able to affect the plants? It depends on the diversity that we have here. Because if we have, and this is quite simple to understand, if we have a great diverse microbial community, they have to compete. The development of a low quality here, pathogenic may gain the condition the plant. So it's a very good justification for keeping if we want to biomass production in our soils. Of course, that we can do it. We can say that's probably what's happened in the last few years or centuries not, but decades. We can do it without concerning with the soil biodiversity, but what we need to have, pesticides in great concentrations. If we lose these partners in the fight against pathogens, we can survive, but with great concentrations of plant protection products to do it. And of course that we know very few about this, unfortunately. Some studies are being done in the lab, some studies are being done in the field. We also are extremely concerned because we know very few in the present conditions, and we know even less in the future conditions that will be presented to us by climate changes. So, but several studies are being done, and several studies are guiding us to the same conclusions. For example, in this very recently published paper, these authors, what they have done, they have done a microcosm study or mesocosm study in controlled conditions, and they sterilize the soils, and then they have the community. They get the microbial community from another soil, and they inoculate, but in different concentrations. Let's say this. They manage the addition of the biological diversity of soils in order to have different levels of biodiversity in their treatments, is what you see here. When we come from here to here, the biodiversity decreases, and what they observe, unfortunately, what they observe is that almost all the functions of soils are reduced. So we lose the multifunctionality of soils. And for example, the plant's diversity decreases, the net productivity decreases, but then increases again. What seems strange? Well, so we can say, but we are okay because we can still produce biomass, but of less species. We can produce biomass of a limited number of species that will tolerate the conditions, but the diversity decreases. And we are going to reduce the ability of soil to sequester carbon, which is extremely important because we need the carbon in the soil, not in the atmosphere. We are going to decrease the capacity of the soil to degrade organic matter, to make the turnover on nitrogen. We are going to lose the nitrogen for the atmosphere, And we are going to increase the leaching of soils. We are going to of phosphorus. We are going to lose the phosphorus in the soil, so we are going to need more fertilizers, and also nitrogen. So what these authors try to prove is that in fact, if we reduce biodiversity, of course that is in an experimental way, not a realistic situation, but what they have demonstrated is that if we decrease biodiversity, we lose the functions of soils. And in fact, we know that our agroecosystems have been managed intensively, and our soils are extremely degraded. They are compacted due to the use of heavy machinery, of tillage practices. We have used and abused in the application of plant protection products. Our soils are becoming salinized because the saline solutions, and several other aspects are have degraded deeply the biodiversity of our soils. And now the concern is, so we need to assess the quality of soils and which indicators we are going to use. And because even with a simple set of indicators, we can perceive that in fact the quality of agricultural soils are degraded. This is the results, only the summary of the results of a study that we have made in the banks of two rivers in Portugal, here in the north. This one is a tributary of the Douro River, and the other one that I will show you is in the Minho River that makes the frontier between Portugal and Spain. And our aim was to perceive how are these soils that should be, but they are not. They should be covered by riparian vegetation to protect the interaction between the soil and the water. But in several areas, the riparian vegetation was replaced by agricultural fields because the farmers go to extend the fields as much as they can, but then they are stopped at the river. And we have compared two fields, one with riparian vegetation that I will call here the reference, and one with the agriculture field. And this is the data for the combination of several physical and chemical parameters that we have measured, and only based on the physical and chemical parameters, our soils are completely different. They are completely set apart, and there are differences between them. But they are very, very close to each other. So the problem is not the distance or the different type of soil that we were analyzing. It was the use that made the difference. And we joined some biological data to this, and the difference is maintained. So this demonstrates that in fact we can assess the quality of soils with sensitive biological, chemical, and physical indicators, and we are going to be sure that probably the soils are affected or are not affected. Because if we go here to the Minho River, we see that only with the physical and chemical data we separate the reference and agricultural soils, but the biological became more sensitive, and they tell, okay, these agriculture samples or soils are in fact different from the reference soils, but this one is not so different. So the biological data increases our sensitivity of our evaluation. What biological data we have included here? Of course, then we can talk about many indicators, but in this case, what we have included, since we were concerned with the communication between the soil and the water, right? And we have included some ecotoxicological tests with soil elutriates, extractions of the soil made with water, and we test with aquatic organisms. And we also had a quite simple ecological test, which is called the Beit-Lamida test, that measures the feeding activity of soil invertebrates and lets us to perceive if in fact in these soils we have an active or not invertebrate community in these soils. So these are some of the biological indicators that we can use, but of course that we can use many others, especially those related with, we have made them, but I'm not showing them, but especially microbial indicators must be included in these evaluations. Well, and why we should be, which type of biodiversity should concern us? Structural diversity, functional diversity, what we should do, because this is very important when we deal with politicians. Because if we look some specific functions, for example, these beetles are the dung beetles, no one likes them, but they have a very important function. When the soils are fertilized with organic matter, they are responsible for incorporating the organic matter in the soil. Because if the organic matter will be here, the nitrogen will be lost by for the atmosphere. So they have a very important function, but it's a very strict group that makes this. And if they disappeared, this function will be eliminated. Also, if we look to these bacteria that are very important to fix nitrogen by some plants, they are also a very strict group. There are not many groups of bacteria doing this. So if we eliminate this function will disappear. So thinking on that, we should be concerned with the structural diversity, because when we talk about structural diversity, we are talking about all the species that make part of the ecosystem, and our target could be to protect all of them. But if we look to the functional diversity, we can say no. Okay, we can manage in order to lose some diversity, but most important is to keep the functions. While I'm able to keep the functions, okay, I can keep my management practice on this level. Because these models, let's say, is that probably at the soil, which is very diverse, what happens is that we can have two models. One model says that as much as I increase biodiversity, more functions I will have. And the other model says that, okay, I increase the diversity, the functions increase, but after a certain level, even if I have more diversity, I will not have more functions. This is what is called the redundancy hypothesis. There are many species that are redundant, and we can assume, okay, let's manage to lose only these ones. But what we know is if we lose these ones that are redundant, in the future we can have new stressors. Now we are concerned with pesticides, with excess of fertilizer, salinization, but then we can be concerned with fire, and we can be concerned with drought. And if we lose the structural diversity, we are losing the resilience of the ecosystem. So we really need to decide what we want to protect.
Sorry?
And
why do we need to decide now? Like, should we decide like already? Should have decided what we should, or if we should go for the structural or the functional?
What to decide if we can decide now? Sorry.
So we know that structure is really, really important in soil, and the functions are really dependent on the structure as well.
Mhm.
So I'm not quite sure. Have we already decided what we should, in
No.
which direction we should go to?
We didn't decide it yet.
Why not?
Because we don't have enough knowledge, yes, we are collecting, and because you have to deal with politicians, we have to negotiate with them. And of course, like agronomists, ecologists, I have no doubts if I can choose what I would choose, but relation to it, so. You know, that's yes, that's the problem.
Mhm.
Yes, but thank you for asking. And you can interrupt me, no problem. And there was a figure that disappeared here. Okay, I don't know why. So, what I want to show you with this figure, and you can read the paper of Jorg, and I, no problem. It was more clear for you. I don't know what's happened to the figure, but I can explain what is the idea. Okay, we need to protect, we need to evaluate the quality of soils, to decide those that are more effective, what we can do to restore them. But there are different things that we need to work on. We need to select the best indicators to assess the soil biodiversity and the soil quality. And we need to have reference we don't have. Okay, measure the biodiversity of the soil and if this is good or bad. I need a reference value. I need a threshold. I need her on this soil, on that soil, is high or is low. So what we need to have is to found soils of good quality and to define reference values to have a threshold to know if our soils are effective or not. And we need also to decide, and once again, this is a political decision, which is the level that we are going to consider acceptable. Okay, each use of soil, agriculture, industrial, and so on, we have to analyze which level of disturbances will cause, and we need to decide which level of disturbances is acceptable in order to know that in the future this soil can recover or not its functions. And another problem is that we don't have standard protocols. There, in the last years, ISO and the OECD have working a lot, and they have developed several standard protocols to access different communities, soil communities, microorganisms, invertebrates, protocols to how collect, how identify, how to quantify abundance, diversity, index of diversity, and so on. But there are also a great lack of more protocols for doing that. And why standardization is important? Because if I'm more strict in making this evaluation and the country, other country is less strict, when I want to restore my soils, I have to spend more money because if I am more strict in my evaluation, I will find more soils needing restoration, and while the neighbor countries will find less soils because it's less strict. So I will spend more money, and this will cause inequalities in the budget required to recover the soils and to protect the soils. And this is especially for you. That is this is very recent publication, and I think that is a very new topic of research. Very recently, okay, We are better in understanding what is the relationship between the soil biodiversity and the production of biomass, production of crops, but we don't know nothing in the post-harvest phase. We don't know if these plants came from a soil with high biodiversity, if they have a better life until it comes to our fork, right? Until it comes to our table. Why? I'm not agronomist, I'm sorry, but I'm learning some with a colleague. And you know that in fact there are several, in the post-harvest period, there are several unit operations with different aims, increasing the shelf life of the products, eliminate microbial loads, making nutrients available, remove toxins, generate food with different structures, produce appealing sensory traits, make food items immediately available, fresh and immediately available. So there are several operation units that have to be performed, and we know that some food items are very sensitive, and agronomists are making research in improving all of these operation units in order to provide food of good quality to the consumers at the end. And in order to protect the products and not lose the products in all of these unit operations. But what we need to know, and what it could be interesting, is what is the difference in terms of the resistance of our food products in passing all of these operation units, if they come from a soil with great biodiversity or if they come from a soil with a low biodiversity. And this will be the future. This will be also a next research step. Why? Because we need to talk with the consumers, and the markets are changing, and the persons are each day more concerned, of course, with the quality of food, the nutritional quality, with the safety of the food, but they are also concerned with the sustainability of the processes. If the food was produced under sustainable practice or not. And this will be very interesting, and these authors make several outstanding questions about what we need to know, what we need to study to understand this. And I don't know, you have questions? Thank you, and thank you for your attention. Okay.
I have two questions actually. How do you assess the potential of finding new medicines somewhere in soil? We were talking about at the beginning. And as a soil ecologist, what kind of production methods would you recommend to farmers to kind of find this compromise between productivity and soil conservation?
Well, I didn't talk about that because I probably surpassed the time. I don't know. I was concerned with that. And well, about new medicines, yes, the protection of biodiversity is important for several reasons, and this is another one that was in that scheme of the FAO. This is there. But I didn't specify all of them. But we know that each day we are finding new bioactive compounds from bacteria, from fungi, and probably there are many new bioactive compounds that we can find in the future. But if we destroy biodiversity, we will never know them. And this is a very important reason. Another very important reason why we should protect biodiversity, but this is true not only for the soil biodiversity, but for the biodiversity in general. And regarding the new practices, the European agriculture, the PAC It's the translation. I'm missing the translation. The PAC.
Agriculture policy.
The common agriculture, European agriculture policy is making several changes and is adding new strategies to help farmers to adopt more sustainable practices in order to protect the soils. And they are even limiting the support that they give to farmers to those that apply those measures. If they don't apply, probably they will lose the possibility to get some support from the European Commission.
Would you say those measures are go far enough, or is it just some kind of?
I think that if all start to apply them, it will be a good principle, because it's to reduce the tillage, it's to keep ecological areas near the agriculture fields, are measures to reduce the erosion of the soils. Well, there are several ones to reduce the application of plant protection products, to incorporate to rotate or to change the cultures in the fields, and to use some species to cover crop species that then can be incorporated to increase the organic carbon in the soil and to reduce the use of the need of fertilizers. And there are several very interesting measures. I think that they are going in the right side, but probably it will take time.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting. Well, I'm from Mexico, and I have like a question like related with the test that you did with the land that are next to the rivers. I don't know here, but for example, in Mexico, there were like too many problems with there were like factories near to the rivers, and they were putting the deposits in the rivers. And it was really interesting because like it was like a slaughterhouse near to the river, and they were putting the like purines or something like this in the river, and then they are using in another town the water from the river to do the irrigation for the plants, and in the other hand the fabric that were producing wheels for the cars. They were putting also the residues in the river, and they did like a test in the fields where they were using this water, and it contains like more, like we can say minerals, like the soil, that were using the water from the river that was next to the slaughterhouse than the other one that was in the, how to say, in the wheel factory. I know that it's really, really different, like the things that they can put out, but how?
What you are saying is that the factory or the mile is discharging to the field.
Yes.
And then they are to the river,
sorry,
and then they are pumping the water for irrigation.
Yeah, but well, basically, like, we can acknowledge, but basically the question, I don't know what you think is, but what I was thinking is that the slaughterhouse is like put it outside, we can say like organic materials, if we can call it like this, but in the river, but I don't know, like it could be by this reason, or I don't know, like.
Well, let's see if I understand. Well, in the relation with water and the discharges and the soils, the good news for you is that it's not only in Mexico that these things happen. They happen everywhere. Of course, that in the Europe now we have strict legislation to control these things, and they are becoming better. But it's always the same. The rivers receive the discharges. Of course, that in our case, in principle, they are treated. The highest organic load was reduced, but the same water is used in many regions for the irrigation of fields. And this is why we have problems with soil salinization, because the fertilizers are rich in salts, and these salts keep on the water, and sometimes they go to the underground water, but then they are used for irrigation, and the salts come here again to the soil. And this is a cycle, right? But the question is that I don't know if you understand. I understand if you are asking me if they should stop.
No, like
or if they should use organic matter.
Let me try and explain.
Yeah.
O que ele está a dizer, acho que é num curso de água, havia um matadouro que fazia as descargas perto do rio e usavam a água para irrigação de campos. E também aconteceu com uma fábrica de pneus. E quando eles fizeram análises à água e ao solo, onde eram usadas as águas de ambos os cursos de água, a água do matadouro tinha nutrientes que até eram valiosos para as plantas, ao contrário da água dos pneus. Ele está a perguntar qual é a sua opinião, porque é que isso acontece, sabe? Acho que é isso.
The water from the slaughterhouse, thank you. The water from here, you have a high organic matter input, and this is why it's better. And because this organic matter can be degraded and can be recycled and give nutrients to the water. Of course, that today we can be concerned because when we breed animals, we use hormones and we use antibiotics and so on. But well, let's forget that problem. But this water is the main problem is organic contamination. And the other one, probably you have serious contaminants like metals and so on. And this is more concerning. The problem is, well, no one is good, because the water from the slaughterhouse, you also have, it's a problem of public health. You can have microorganisms, it's not, but you can think like that, you can think like that. Even if you have bacteria and microorganisms that can be a public health, if they go to a soil that has a biodiverse microbial community, probably these bacteria and these microorganisms will not be able to survive and to develop there, or at least they will have more difficulty to do it. It's a public health anyway, it's not so good.
Last question.
So you were talking about that we need a standardized protocol, so we can go out onto the field and see, okay, that's how the soil is, and we're gonna add like this. How we gonna regenerate it? But in the beginning, you were telling there are like 1,000 different types of soil, even in Europe. So how could a standardized protocol be? Yeah, okay.
Good question. The standardized protocol it's precisely because we have very different soils. And if you don't have a standard procedure to analyze the biodiversity, then you get to the end and you don't know if the difference that you found is because you have a different soil or because you use a different procedure. So this is why it's important to have a standard protocol. But the standard protocol is, I'm going to the field, I want to study oligochaetes. How I should collect it, number of samples, the sampler, which is the procedure. And I will do this here, in Spain, Italy, and so on. Everybody will apply the same procedure, even in different soils. So but then we can compare the results.
And I like add on that because that was my question. How can we achieve that? Because I really cannot imagine that the whole world would use the kind of procedures, but how, I mean, where do we start? How can you like implement this ideologically? Where should we start? I don't know. Which organizations or?
There are several groups working on this. There are research centers, European research centers that are trying to collect this information. I think that for Portugal, unfortunately, we don't have too much work done on this. We have to work a lot. Some countries are in a better way, and others are going more slowly. Because, of course, there are lots of people interested in doing this and in starting, and the main limitation is the funding.
We should start like local and then hope to reach out like this.
Today we have a very good tool, citizen science.
Yes.
Probably citizen science could be a very good tool for that. To start.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, last one, really.
We need more information about soil and how it works before we can go to the government to tell them, hey, we need to change something. But we already know that we are degrading our soils, we are polluting our soils, we are losing soil everywhere on this planet. When do you think will we have enough information? We only know like 10% of the bacteria in the soil. We don't know anything at all about soil. So. When do we start? All right, hey, look, we have some.
I don't know how to respond to your question because you are young and I don't want to disappoint you. You know the precautionary principle? We apply the precautionary principle to the mobile phones in the airplanes. We know that they may interfere with the communication and cause problems, but no one wants to test. So the better thing is to apply the precautionary principle. So when we go to the place, everybody switch off the. And my opinion is that sometimes when they say, you don't know enough, is a good way to stop us. Because we are scientists and we are honest, the principles, I hope so. And when we don't know, we don't say that we know.
But we know.
We know. I think that we know enough to know that we must do something immediately. And even supporting us in the precautionary principle. We cannot stay here and hope, well, I will hate until I know everything, and then I will do something. I think that we know enough to start. And we must start.
But the government is telling us we don't know enough.
The government, well, you are.
That's political. That's political.
Probably I will get fired.
Yes, that's political. So on the last note, is soil renewable or not renewable? Yes or no?
Of course, it's not renewable.
But some people said it's renewable. Some people said it's renewable. Some people said it's renewable.
They said, they said, of course, but it's not. At least during our lives.
Yeah, maybe 2 million years. But
the question is, some countries, I will not talk about any country in particular, but some countries don't have legislation to protect the soils, and they are not so concerned with that.
But then the science has to step up and tell us, we already know.
Of course.
But why are we quiet? Why is it scientific?
But you know what is my hope and why I'm here? Are you?
Why does it always have to be us? You're a professor in Portugal, and you're like one of the top minds in your field. Why? Sorry, this is personal, but why are you not like getting involved with telling the public system, hey, or the government, hey, stop, you're destroying our habitats, you're destroying our lives, because when soil is degraded, we can't produce anymore. Why does it have to be like the young generation?
We don't have nothing to lose, and they have jobs and they have relationships.
The young generation is very strong. If you want, who are very strong. if you want. But of course that I try to do this every day. Professora Susana tries to do the same every day. All of us, we try to communicate, to talk, to pass the message, this is our work all the days. But there are other things, there's economics, there are other aspects that move the decision.
It's really complicated, for sure.
That's the problem. But the young people need to be, because you are going, when we talk about sustainable development, we are talking that, well, we must protect for the future generations. But you are the future generations that are going to suffer with all of this. So you must fight.
That's why I'm so passionate about it.
Okay. I would
Só se vê esta câmera muito mais. Estão a fazer o streaming, só que não se vê nada, não se vê nada.
Ryan, was assustada. Ryan komt toe dat last topic live online. We have Professor Belmira Neto from the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Porto.
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and to give me the opportunity to be here and to talk a little bit about what I've been researching and what I'm doing at the Faculty of Engineering. So the title is Life Cycle Assessment. May I ask you, just before I start, is there anyone else, present that already knows what is life cycle assessment, or already have heard at some point? Okay, wonderful. Normally I have a 0, yeah? There is no 0%, so I'm happy to know that somebody already heard about, and I hope just to be knows a little bit about, to explain a little bit more. And for the ones that we are talking, that you know this topic. So I start with my footprint. Yeah, well, I was born in Porto, Portugal, for the ones that don't know me. I graduated a long time ago in materials engineering, so it was metallurgical material engineering, so a heavy industry sector. But then I decided at some point in life just to change a little bit the topic of my career, and I went to environmental engineering, and since then I'm following it, and I can tell you that as far as I go, I more enjoy to do it. So then went for a PhD in the Netherlands. That's where I met Professor Susanna. Yeah, Netherlands is putting us together. And then at some point, it was not a long time ago, I think, 4 years ago, I decided to change a little bit and going out from academia to the policy making, just to see how the things work over there. So I went to Joint Research Center just to understand how do they apply LCA and other methods, scientific methods, into policy making. So I became a little bit more rich just to know. I went back, and of course, 2 years ago, I went back to the University of Porto. I came back here, but a little bit more research just to understand how the things are being done at the policy level. Since then, and since already some time ago, I'm teaching LCA and industrial ecology back in the Faculty of Engineering. Well, after going or introducing with my footprint, this is the presentation outline. Just what is that about LCA? What is the life cycle of products? What is LCA in the literature? Of course, pushing all the time to the topic of food production or agro-food production. The methodology, a little bit what is needed to do. And then I brought some case studies that were developed by us in the Faculty of Engineering. So LCA, life cycle assessment for the Portuguese wine, the Vinho Verde. Also another product that is very much, that Portugal has a high relevancy on the production, so it's corn production. And also, I, together with the Faculty of Nutrition, we made an LCA for fish consumption patterns, because also Portugal is leading the fish consumption within the world. Also, at the end, a little bit on LCA and public policy making. How do they do this? What is being done there? So how can we use LCA just to support environmental policy making? And also, of course, at the end, some concluding remarks, and that will conclude the presentation. And I hope not to last longer than 1:15. So here, this is the concept of life cycle thinking. This is also a very good way of showing you what we are talking about. So we are looking at products, and LCA is applied normally to products or services. And what we are looking is the full supply chain. So we look at the product, we want to understand how the materials is extracted just to produce this product, then how we can process this material in order to have components, how the product is manufactured, how it is used, And then, of course, we cannot forget the waste management, that is the end of life of this product. And this applies to all types of products that you might name. Yeah, not only agro-food products that I will focus here, but also all kinds of products, televisions, whatever. So this is like the structure, and is based on an ISO standard that help us how to measure the environmental impact that occurs along with the full life cycle of this product. Of course, when we are designing this supply chain, we cannot forget there are some loops happening, yeah? And these loops, normally they are beneficial because if you reuse your product, you are avoiding that new raw materials are extracted. So when we want to assess or calculate the environmental impact of a certain product, what we are doing is to understand what is going on the full supply chain, independently of the product that we are using. But the genes are here because I wanted to show you an example, and I got this one as what is the supply chain, what can look like a supply chain of a global world. And if you look to a pair of genes, we can see have the countries. I hope you can at least see these big titles. They are the countries, they are supplying materials for you to have a pair of genes at the end. Yeah. So we have Namibia, Australia, here Germany. So you the copper, the zinc, the brass that you need just to have the buttons in your jeans. And then you have France, Ireland, Japan, and Turkey supplying you all the materials you need just to build these jeans. And then Benin, Italy, and that's it. Also giving you some materials. Benin is giving you the raw material that is cotton. So if we look to this, and this is only a pair of jeans, yeah? If we look to this, we understand that we have to look at the full world to understand and to design the supply chain of a certain product. That can be more or less complex depending on the product you are looking at, okay? This is one example, and we need to understand, sorry, is it Portuguese, but the relation between the countries and the materials they supply for you to build up, or for this case, Turkey, to be able just to assemble all the parts that were produced all around the world. And then what is LCA doing? Trying to measure the environmental impact of all this supply chain, and to understand that for having a pair of jeans as your main product, what is the process that is really stealing or contributing to the largest burden of to the environment. This is basically what LCA is doing. Put it in words, so LCA, what is that? It's a methodology used to assess, I would put here also quantify, measure the environmental impacts throughout the life cycle of a product or a service, including the design of the product, the extraction of raw materials, production, use and consumption, and the end-of-life activities that can be reusing, recycling, deposition, incineration, composting, etc. So all the life cycle. So we need to understand what are the resources we need for each one of these boxes that we call life cycle stages, and also what are the emissions for the environment. On knowing the resources we use, on knowing the emissions for the environment related with all this full supply chain, we can calculate the environmental impact, and at the end say, hey, which one is the box that is the red color, yeah? And if there is a red color that we identify, the hotspots, we need to act on that just to lower the environmental impact. Yeah. Basically, this we have done. How is LCA in the literature? I brought you here one of the largest publications devoted to LCA. Just for you to know, the ones that are not aware with this name, that we have scientific material that is devoted to this topic. And if you open it, you get to understand there is a lot of people doing research only on that. Yeah, just to understand systems and to classify. This is for all kinds of industrial sectors, and if you are able to have a look sometime, you can see there is a lot being done. I brought you here some of recent publications on this specific purpose. So we have one for the carbon footprint. That's a little bit part I think that probably carbon footprint you already have heard, most of you. But just to understand how during the supply chain for the production of Chilean organic blueberry production, what are the main hotspots? Yeah, this is what authors have done. And what they say is the conclusions that somehow I sum it up here. Just give you an idea after performing or carrying on this study, what are the main issues related with this? Yeah, and so of course we can identify what is the hotspot and we can act upon just to reduce it. Thomas Nemsek also, they are from Switzerland, also worked on food consumption and nutrition and to understand what are the environmental impacts. There is no novel part that agricultural production often dominates the impact of agro-food products. Diets containing less meat tend to be more environmental friendly. And this is something that we already know, but what is this author showing is by numbers, just to give you the open up the methodologies, just to show why this is like that, why to consume bovine meat will lead to higher environmental impact that if you compare it with chicken meat, for instance. Yeah. So it's given, and of course there are some material also devoted on, for instance, identifying what is the most environmental friendly packaging. Polystyrene or recycled paper. It can give you, this is the type of results that you can get with this method. Is if I want to compare this material with this material for this specific purpose, what shall I use? A product that has a lower environmental impact. So I can compare these two different materials, or I can even compare two different processes. At the end, just to give you supported a decision, just to support the decision making on shall I use conventional or organic farming on producing milk, and then of course we can say that this can lead to labeling of the products in order that the consumer knows that if he buys this one it will have a lower environmental impact. This is some examples. I could show you many more, but I also appeal to your curiosity just to open up the magazine and to see what you can find there. Another comparison, what I'm bringing here is something not related, of course, with food, but something made available in the literature that you have several hair dryers, hand hair dryers, and it is expressing you in a more comprehensive way what is the global warming potential. I would say the carbon footprint, so it's another word for carbon footprint, considering all the full life cycle of these materials, and these materials are these ones, and putting in a graphic what is the environmental impact from each one. Of course, you can see, like, you can take conclusions on what is the main phase that leads to the environmental impact, and then you can find it here because they are energy consumers. So this is what is in underlining the impact of these ones. Yeah. And then for these ones, because there is no energy consumption here, but you have manufacturing as the main source of the environmental impact. Also, we can take the conclusion that this one should be avoided, and also these ones, and if you want something, please go for this one, either in aluminum or plastic. Okay, and then you can see, well, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in Portugal, we can see this in many more places in the recent years. So probably this was the decision being taken. If this product is evaluated as having the lower energy consumption or global warming potential, it means that it's probably something interesting. I don't know the prices. Another thing that LCA doesn't look at. Yeah, this is, I don't know, but again, if you want to sell something related with environmental impact, you should choose this one. And you can say that you are having or providing a service that is low carbon, as a lower carbon impact. So what is inside this? They are standards, and the standards tells you how you can perform an LCA, a life cycle assessment. They are standard with principles and framework. This is the ISO 14040. And there is a standard that gives you some highlights on requirements and guidelines. Basically, we provide you some examples on showing you how can we apply that. So this is the methodology, just to avoid that. Of course, it took some time that this, I think this standard is coming from 2000, as far as I remember. And what happened before that, it was kind of LCA in LCA, and if a colleague in China is doing an LCA, in principle we are using the same methodology. So at the end we can compare the results and provide it and make it public, okay, or publishing it in a magazine. So what is inside the method? I'm not going to get in detail at all. It's not my goal, just to understand, for making you understand how we can do this. First, we have to define the goal and the scope. So what we are looking at, what do we want to do? After identifying or defining the product or the service that we want to assess and supporting it by saying why I want to do this, for what, for whom, so I have to make it very, very clear why I'm doing this. I go to understand, and then of course I have to make here very clear what are the system boundaries. So what I'm looking at, and this is also a requirement from the standard. Then I go to the inventory analysis. So I'm getting informations on resources, amount of materials, energy and water and other chemicals, whatever that I use for producing this product along the life cycle, and also what are the emissions I'm releasing because I'm using this material, I'm producing it. So this is gathering of data, collection of data. And also after having this, I apply the method. There are several different ones, I'm not getting in detail here, but here I will get the quantitative measurement about the environmental impact. So I get the results. Of course, interpretation is needed here, and the standard requires that it goes along with each one of the steps, because this is quite complex and sometimes we define the boundary, and when we go to the inventory analysis, or even when we are calculating the results, we understand that we have to go back and to include an extra step that we forgot at the very beginning. So that's why you have like these two arrows come from one place to the other one. Why this is important? We can do this for product development. I'm working in a company, Imagine, that is producing equipment for air drying, and I want to develop further my product, so I want to understand what are the environmental impacts related with it, in order just to understand what can I do just to lower the environmental impact. Product development or improvements. This is one of the applications for LCA. Strategic planning that can be made at the business level or government level. Yeah, I want to plan it, strategy for a business activity, so I can do it with using LCA. Public policy making, that's the example that I'm bringing today at the end of the presentation. So why can public policy be using LCA, and for what and whom is working with this, and also marketing, among many others. Marketing is, if I do an LCA of my product and I build and I add together this report together with sales of the product, I can provide documented information why this product is better, or at least I measure it. I know what are the main issues related to this. Now the example for wine. We have looked from viticulture to wine distribution. Yeah, wine products, we didn't enter on the use part. Yeah, this is because we wanted just to assess this viticulture and wine distribution because there was some concerns, and there are still, with food marts, like the impacts associated with transportation of products. So we wanted to assess for this example of wine and the Vinho Verde is around the world. So we want to understand what are distributed. I don't know if you tasted it. If not, please do it. Yeah, it's you're gonna get to the summer, but yeah, it's always try it. You should. It's very, very typical, as they used to say, and it's produced in the northern region part of Portugal. Yeah, as you see here, this is a demarcated region for Vinho Verde production. And we looked at one company that is located in Penafiel because it's one of the biggest, it's the biggest on producing this type of wine. So we look at it, this is our product. This is not marketing, not at all. But again, it's one of the most known and one of the most sold products from this company. That's why we look at it, because we wanted to assess the impact associated with a wine that is going everywhere. So, this is the numbers, 50 million liters of white Vinho Verde produced in the company, in Aveleda, that is the largest producer in Portugal. 30% is exported. The market share in this time for the company is 25% of the national production. 50% was exported. The company vineyards, but they purchase also grapes, a lot of them. I think nowadays it's changing, but in the past they used to purchase a lot of grapes that were not made by them, so not their own production. And they also buy some 40% of most and wine. No irrigation was done by them. So why this is important? Because we wanted really to characterize something that we found that is a representative production for the production of Vinho Verde. That's why we look at the largest producer, the one that sells for most countries, in order to assess the largest impact that we could have. So the worst scenario, as we used to call it. The sales, we needed to know, we cooperate with them on getting and collecting all the data. They sell for 38 countries, and we asked to tell us the countries that they sold and what was the transportation for where they were transporting the vineyard. If they were doing it by truck, boat, plane, whatever, yeah? So we needed to know just to assess the impact associated with the different modes of transportation. That's why we have done it like that, to have really a full picture of what they were doing. So what was our goals? To identify the main environmental impacts associated with the life cycle stages for Vinho Verde, to identify the contribution of each one of the life cycle, viticulture, wine production and distribution. We wanted to know which one has the highest impact, okay? And then also, of course, together with them, they know more than anyone else, to try to identify measures, or at least this part is always normally the most difficult to do, because companies either they sometimes they know, yes, but it's difficult, it requires investments, it requires technology, a lot of things, and sometimes this is the most difficult part. It's the most interesting, or at least for a research person, but it's the most difficult to get and to implement. But in any case, so we wanted to identify measures to reduce this environmental impact. Once we know what was the problem, of course, we could identify possibilities to make this happen. Methodology again, so the product, the supply of the product. Imagine here viticulture and all the small operations you have in viticulture, wine production, all the details, distribution and all the details. What are the raw materials, water and energy coming in? What are the emissions to air, water and soil coming out from all the full supply chain, and with this we could calculate the environmental impacts. And the environmental impacts are measured in terms of global warming potentials, acidification, smog, etc., etc., etc. So all kinds of pollution that you are either taking from the planet or releasing to the planet will provoke a certain type of impact that is the one that is measured on LCA. So functional unit, we need to just really look on details. So functional is one bottle, so all the results will be reported to one bottle of white vinho verde. Also a little bit on the informations regarding the wine production, and also what are the stages. So here, viticulture, grapes transport, because they transport from client suppliers, the grapes from suppliers to Aveleda, and we needed to assess also the impacts of this transport, production and transportation of raw materials. So enologic products that they use to produce the wine, they were also taken on board and assessed. This is also transportation for wine and must, the wine production in the company, and of course afterwards the distribution. So we wanted to have as complete as possible on calculating all the activities or the impacts for all the activities that take place within all these life cycle stages. And this is our boundary. So we need to make it clear for the readers of this material, what are the boundaries we have considered. So together with the company, we identify all the activities that could lead to an environmental impact. And we wanted to have these details in order to understand what were within these activities the one that has a higher impact, in order to tell the company at the end, this is the major problem you have, okay? Also, wine production, so what are the activities taking part in doing wine production? We include the bottle production because the product is wine, plus the bottle, plus the label, plus the cork stopper, and everything that is composing this product. The production and transport of wine products, so a long list of wine products. For us was very curious to understand that wine need thousands of it's quite impressive. So all the products that they use, the production, the impact, please pay attention to that. The impact is not only because you are using the pesticides and fertilizers in the soil. The impact is also related with the production of these. And on looking to the full supply chain, you need to produce pesticides to use them. Yeah, we wanted to assess on incorporating this in our analysis. We wanted to know if the production of the pesticides is higher, the environmental impact, than the use in itself. Yeah, it's also important to take on board, and we have done this because we are using software that allows us to do this, the environmental impact associated with production of fertilizers and also with pesticides. Distribution, and this is what is out. We didn't consider it all because some studies publications said it was not relevant compared with these phases we considered here. Production, distribution, more the things we look at it, but we have considered information. We needed to understand first what we were looking at. We worked together with Aveleda in identifying a campaign that they think they use most of the products. Yeah, just to have again the largest scenario possible, so the worst scenario we could have. But it might be that if you do again an LCA for another campaign that is taking place in another year, the impact is going to be different, okay? Because it depends on the amount of materials that you are using. So we have a snapshot, a picture of this campaign for this year, right? Wine production, so we collect information, this is available, so we had to identify what are the time frame we consider. And this time frame is the data that we get and we collected from the Vleda. So stabilization, bottling and storage and distribution. So it starts in November 2007 with winter and summer activities in vineyards, and it ends up in December 2009 where they sell the last bottle, it is assumed they sell the last bottle from this campaign. So this is the inventory. This is not for going through, of course, and then to read it all, but again, the inputs and the outputs, it is not complete list for collecting all the information related with the inputs, materials, energy, land occupation, electricity, diesel, phytosanitary products, fertilizers, all the information that you were using and all the things that were coming out. Here, they don't measure at all what are the emissions released to air, to water, and to soil. So we had to go to FAO and to use some models just to try that they are not specific for this region. We know we are very much aware of it, but we needed to find either in the literature or somebody that could help us on understanding what could be the releases for air, for soil and water, for this type of emissions that we have. Them, we'll list them all here, related of course with a literature reference, because this data is not currently available. So this is again the same inputs and outputs related with viticulture. So it lists a long list of things, being emissions to air, to soil, to air, the grapes. So we need 1 kilo of grapes just to produce 1 bottle of wine, Vinho Verde. I haven't translated, sorry, because sometimes it's difficult for me how to translate correctly to English. It's in the paper we publish, it's more detailed information, but here is like all the activities that we thought important to consider that takes place in the vinification, in conservation and winemaking and bottle and storage. So all this detailed information we had to look at. This is also inputs and outputs for wine production for the second life cycle stage that we had to look at. And this is the transportation data. So we list all the countries, we understand, and this is also the unit that we are using in software we make use for LCA. So all type of transportation modes for wine. Results. This is a table of results. So what we have here, environmental impact categories. So these are the results of LCA. I just make it here the global warming potential, because normally is the one that is most known. Then we have viticulture, bottle production, wine production, and distribution in domestic, in the country or worldwide. And this are the numbers. So the percentage of, in the overall, the percentage of contribution for each one of the life stages for each one of the global problems. Let's see the graph, that probably is easier to understand. So at the end we can tease, yeah, we can get much more detail that I'm not bringing, but the end is like we have the impact categories, we have all the life cycle stages, and we can take our conclusions. And the conclusions say that the viticulture, compared with the other ones, is the like. It's not surprisingly, because it's also verified in related literature for wine. Viticulture is the stage that is mostly contributing for the majority of the environmental impact categories that we are looking at. Okay, so we make evident what are our results. And then on looking on this, you can understand either the business unit can take measures, if he knows, if we provide details on why this is like that, they can take measures just to improve their own products, but also the policy making can look at it and say, well, if they want to indicate or identify some rules in where to pinpoint the issues, where are the issues, and where just to make it evident that things have to to change. Results. Viticulture is the phase that is the largest contribution to the environmental impact. You can see that for the ones that we have, the size is over 50%. The production of bottles occupies the second place. Yeah, we could see along the time, and I've spoken with the glass bottle producers, that the thickness of the bottle is decreasing. Yeah, and this was something like a protocol that they received from the organization IAASWorld, the Organization International for Wine. So they are trying to say, well, we know that the bottles production, they occupy the second, is the second activity with relevance for the environmental impact. So they were, or the winemaking industry, as far as I remember, they were trying to reduce or press the glass industry just to reduce the thickness of the bottles, just to lower the environmental impact. And we could also identify the distribution effect for this specific case it was not relevant, or at least compared with the other ones. Okay, viticulture is the one that is leading to larger environmental impact. Comparing with other studies, we could see there are still some things to be done in harmonization, although there are standards saying that we could do things in the same way. They are in relation with the boundaries, consider the things differ, and because of that, the results differ. And it was something, and there are some publications happening more current on explaining why the global warming impacts differ. Yeah, this is being done to explain this. One of the things we can say why our results here are different from the other one has to do with mechanization in agriculture production. There are more mechanization, less mechanization, and this, of course, will have the contributors are the use of fossil fuels. And if you are using more, if you are doing more mechanization, the amount of fossil fuels consumed and air pollution is bigger. And also, different amounts of fertilizers being used. That can explain somehow the difference between global warming for wines produced and marketed within Europe. This is for wine. Implications for the sector. Critical life cycle phases are identified. So we know for wine what are the major issues. We can identify more sustainable practice for agriculture production, specifically for wine production, and it can be optimization of use of fertilizers. After we have published this result, I got a phone call, email from a colleague from Switzerland asking me why this company is using 3 times more of nitrogen compounds that we are using, or the average is using. And I could not explain that, and I gave back to Avleda. I don't know if they continued talking with the colleagues, but it was true. They were using 3 more, so the impact categories associated with fertilizers use was, or the amount was 3 times, as far as I remember, bigger than the average one. So it can lead you to some tips that can be explained, and you are from agriculture production, you might know more than me, that can be explained. And I remember to be talking with the responsible in Avleda, and it's because it has to deal with weather conditions. But yeah, our job is to show them the results, and of course is to identify the options and practice. It has to be done together, of course. But it can reveal things like that. So harmonization within countries is also a need, just to understand why this colleague is not including transportations from grape to this, from this to that, and we are. So if we are, we have an impact that is higher. So this has to be more clear. And as far as I know, the Organization for Wine, the National Organization for Wines, we're working towards to have more sustainable reporting and harmonization in that. And of course, we also can have this result enable the definition of public policies based on environmental sustainability perspective. So it gives you a clear picture, a measurement of what is impact, and of course people can work in agreement just to lower the environmental impact. This is the end for wine. I have here for cork, so what I will pass, slides I think are going to be available. If you want, I don't mind just to give you. I will go through this to show you the result, but I will go directly to, I think it's better for you, the policy making issues. It's more related with the agriculture production, so I will pass on this. This is a study for cork as well that we've made, boundaries, the inventory analysis also, as I showed you for wine, for cork preparation, stoppage production, finishing, and the bottling locations. And these are the results. Again, it shows you that the forest management is one of the biggest contributors, and this is for Portugal. Forest management is an issue, and this is related again with the need for cleaning and pruning operations, which are repeated several times over the life cycle of the cork oak tree. Yeah, this is like 10 years periods. Don't forget, cork production takes a long time, 9-10 years, if you are able just to produce it. So we have to sum up all the machine operations taking part on that. And of course, the rest of the options is quite nothing when we compare with the amount of cleaning and pruning operations using fossil fuels. Here, this is for fish consumption patterns. So we look at what are the mix of fish specimens consumed in Portugal. So we have them cod, egg, sardine. Yeah, we consume a lot of fish. With cod leading it in mass. But the curious thing that it's hake, hake and salmon, the ones that are the big contributors. They are not, well, we consume more cod than egg, but the egg is the fish specimen that gives you more. This is academic study because we are not supposing to tell people that should eat cod or sardines instead of egg. And we didn't also look to the biodiversity because LCA is rather weak on assessing the biodiversity issues on calculating environmental impact, but again, gives you an idea of how the things work out. The same for the different impact categories and hake and salmon, comparing all the species, so we can compare for global warming what are the species, the fish specimens that leads to more environmental impact than the other ones. And now the part on policy making. Well, this coming, this was first the framework or the situations. We were at the Joint Research Center. They developed criteria, well, among other things, and this one is particular, criteria that the people that is purchasing could use in order to purchase agri-food products that have a lower environmental impact. So they publish guidelines, and these guidelines say, well, if you are within the public sector, so you are in the university, the government, a museum, an hospital, and when you are purchasing goods and services, you can use this, is a voluntary tool, but you can use these particular guidelines in order to purchase products and services that have a lower environmental impact. And this is what I'm talking about. We call this green public procurement, okay? And what is defined as a public authority seek to purchase goods and services and works with a reduced environmental impact throughout their life cycle. This is the definition by the European Commission of what is green public procurement. And this is a voluntary policy tool. Although being voluntary, we can see and have the chance to work with countries from the north and countries from the middle and the south. And the practices on purchasing green products is completely different. So we have countries from the north pushing up in order to have products, pushing up the southern countries just to have harmonization guidelines for everybody to do the same.
Sorry, why is it voluntary?
Sorry?
Why is it voluntary?
Can I respond to you at the end? Because at the end, can I do this? Okay, I'm happy to respond, to take some time to respond to that to you. So why this is relevant in public procurement? Because government expenditure on works, goods and services represent 14% of the European Union GDP. It's a big number. So if the public authorities are giving the example to others of purchasing green products, we could probably take on board all the business activities and industry to do the same. So they say the public sector can make an important contribution towards local, regional, national and international sustainable goals. That's why the European Commission is trying to get these people on board in order to innovate and then to support and to recommend to the industry to supply green products. So they have several products that they look at, and there are guidelines for green public procurements for a huge number of products. I'm always focused on the N item, that is food products and catering service for fruits, meats. So if you are from a government and you want to purchase fruits, meats, whatever, food products, what can you do for having the ones with the lower environmental impact? This is available on the site from the DG Environment, and you can download this and to understand better what are the criteria they use. At the Joint Research Center, we develop, we understand what is the market, how the market is responding to that, what is being done for the purchasing of food products and catering services. We will build a report, and I'm only focusing on chapter 3 because it's in the chapter 3 that you are going to see the life cycle assessment. Yeah, and the criteria that they propose, because it's green public criteria, this is basically based on LCA results. So what a page from this big report on chapter 3, food procurement, different types of food items, and also here you see what are the environmental hotspots related with the production of fruit, vegetables, bread and cereals, and what are that the European Commission defines the criteria, the areas for improvement. So integrated production, organic production, and environmental responsible palm oil, etc. So it gives you an idea of what are the major issues related with these food categories and what are the possibilities to reduce this environmental impact. And they sum up, these are the criteria that they are proposing to be adopted. This, when adopted, has to be applicable for all the EU member states. Yeah? So everybody has to read through and say, yes, I can do this. An example for organic food product. This is the criteria. At least X% of the total purchase of food and drink products will comply with the regulation for organic production. Yeah? If the public authority wants to use it, it has to copy this criteria and fulfill this X%. And this X%, they recommend different options. Yeah? This might lead the response to you as well, because to get agreement on what is the X value that I can propose for all the EU 28 member states is not an easy value. I remember to be in one of these meetings with stakeholders from all Europe, and Malta, that's a small island in Europe, said, I cannot commit with 10% of organic production, because in the island they don't have it. And they are not keen on importing it because they need to comply with green public criteria. So that's why it's very difficult to make it mandatory. They are giving in some freedom, guidelines for some of the criteria, and everybody can use the recommended values. This is the first step. Once this is implemented, maybe in the long feel something that is mandatory, where right now no one wants, because the implications on courses, if we make this mandatory, could be very, very high for some countries, and it's not possible that in Portugal that we have 50% of organic food for primary school children. Probably is not affordable by the Portuguese government, yeah? Or if it is, they say it's not. Well, and going now for the concluding remarks. LCA, the example is only to show you LCA can be useful also for policy and is being used as useful for policy making. Is a robust and proved useful. Of course, there are some limitations, of course. Yeah, but again, if we don't use it, we don't identify them and we don't work to fulfill them. So robust for identifying environmental hotspots along the supply chain. It helps you to understand what are the issues related with the different life cycle stages. May assist on a more evident support, providing you with documented and evident support to reduce the environmental impacts of products and services. And also, this is an example, I show you that for developing policy making, LCA can be very useful. Of course, there's all the factor of policy, yeah? And then how to balance and put it in the same weight scale, what is the scientific community saying and what are the political goals is another thing that, sometimes is tricky. But yeah, this is it on LCA. I only want to tell you that we applied also for joint effort between 3 faculties in the University of Porto. We submit a proposal for creating a new course for next, together with Professor Susanna, she's also guilty on that, and to have a new course on sustainability of food production and consumption, of course, just linking together what agriculture production, agriculture sciences know, what is environmental engineers know, and also the nutrition department, the consumer behavior. So this is, we have at University of Porto very good conditions for putting these people talking together and to have students on board just to learn more and to help us to getting further with this topic. And thank you very much for your attention.
We have some time for questions if anyone wants to ask them.
The course, is it a course or a lecture or is it a study degree?
It's a course means that in a semester, it's during the course.
Your case study on the Linie Verde, how many people were working on this and for how long?
For a long time. Well, we started first with a master thesis. By then, we didn't have the software. So we make a very simple calculation on the environmental impact. But as long as we didn't have the software, we couldn't publish it. Yeah, so we wanted, so this gave rise for us to buy the software and try to have a more complete view. So it took more, I don't know, I could say 3 or 4 years in total since we started to collect all the information by the software and having this then, well, expertise on that because we didn't have, so it was required to get expertise and use of software to understand how the thing worked. The people involved, me, a lot me, but also colleagues from Aveiro, Aveleda, that is Aveiro is the University of Aveiro. So it's impossible to do it with one person if you want to start. So there was experience in Aveiro on LCA, so I worked together with them. And there were 3 in total students from master students. So we made them this together because there was no financing for that at that time. I would say 3-4 years. But it can take less now. We have the software, we have expertise, so we can take less. I would say 1 year, 18 months just to carry on. We have some projects that are starting, and the duration of the task we forecast to happen in 18 months. So, yeah.
Yes. Delia, thank you very much. For me, it was the first time, although we already met many years ago, that I hear a lecture by you, so it was very interesting. And just to add on the thing that you mentioned about the nitrogen, because I think I might have an explanation, otherwise people think that in Portugal we use 3 times more nitrogen than the other countries. So I think you have seen already, perhaps you have seen the grapes that you produce, the grapevine, to produce vinho verde, are these tall grapevines, are not comparable to the other ones, you know. So we call it high vines. So they are very vegetative, so they need much more nitrogen to grow. So I think that might be at least partly explaining, because it's just the way that the plant is growing. We have really plants that are 2 meters high, so it's completely different from a normal grapevine. The other question, but this is just a remark, I think it can be one of the reasons. The other thing is like, I think this is fascinating, the topic of ICYA. And I was thinking, of course, because you know who I am, I'm always thinking like, how can we collaborate and so on, and which ideas and what can we do. And I'm very much interested in comparing, I would be very much interested in comparing, for instance, open field production with greenhouse production. Let's say tomato in open fields and tomato in greenhouses. But from what I understood from the explanations you gave and the methodology, I see that some things are very specific. For instance, if you take into account the fertilizers, as you mentioned there, this will be very much different from grower to grower. And like even the praise you brought from the Vinho Verde, this company in particular. So my question is, like in your publication, you mentioned something like in Portugal, the wines, like I think it's last one, or not the last one, somewhere that you refer like the LCA in the Portuguese wine, you know? Yeah. But that is very specific of the. So from your experience, does it differ very much if you would look, for instance, even that it will be also another Vinho Verde grower? Do you believe that it will change very much the results or not? Is that so specific, or can it translate to a certain sector, or what do you think?
If we are not, well, first of all, that's why on your first remark, that's why it's very important for us to link together with you and to know about agricultural production. So our limitations are we don't know more. So we rely on the company, and the company sometimes have these limitations because they cannot, well, because they have. They are very much focused on what they are doing. I don't know, but it could be a very good explanation why nitrogen is so big. I remember they were saying, well, it's because sometimes the conditions of the soil, but I cannot understand. There is no dialogue. Yeah, this is probably the reason. That's why the link with you is very, very important. And our working together in terms of differences of the practice. What happens is, if there is no agriculture, I would say there's no difference. Because, well, you produce it more or less, you can use less water, whatever, but at the end, when you sum up all the things, what we see is, if it's not agricultural production, the result is the same. If it is agricultural production, it may vary. And we have some colleagues working in Galicia, and they have compared with different campaigns, yeah, for wine production, and the difference is huge, yeah. And then again, the colleagues, I'm not sure convinced about the conclusions they take, why it's so different. But the carbon footprint in Galicia for different campaigns is for the same producer, varies a lot. So if there is still a need to understand that, and no one knows for sure what, in my point of view, we have some clues, but the link between the agricultural producer, and I'm talking about worldwide, and the environmental engineer is not that yet.
We need to do it.
Yeah, we need to do it. We need really to do it just to make the things happen, and I think we have a lot to do here. Really a lot.
I think since you are talking, I don't want to, then I will stop. I won't make any more comments because the floor is for you. But when you are talking about the seasonal difference, a lot, and most of you are from agronomy, they know, like during the winter time, almost nothing is happening. You know, you hardly give anything to the plants, so the plants are really several times they are dormant. Like for instance, if it's the grapevine, the plant is really good. And in that sense, you are not really inducing much, environmental impact. But okay, but for the grapevine, you cannot talk about two campaigns because you only have one. But even for tomato or for roses, whatever, it will differ because in winter the risk of pests and diseases is much lower. So the fight of the plant protection products that you apply is much less. Like now, I have currently a European Union project, and we are also taking samples from growers during the winter on roses, on strawberries, and on tomato during the winter time and during summer and springtime. And I'm sure the difference will be very high. We are just starting now, but already we have results from the winter. And from the winter, there were no, the impact was really low in the amount of plant protection products. And in summer, we are already seeing that it's much higher. Summer now, in spring, is already increasing. So this explains also these differences.
I heard that at some point, just to conclude, some point, Aveleda bought a medium station that you know, probably, or a station,
Yes.
And I heard that because of that, the amount of pesticides were decreasing a lot. So this was a very interesting to investigate how the purchase of a certain equipment can lower the environmental impact. Yeah, but we didn't measure it. But we know there is a relation between things that probably is very, very curious to present to the world in order to know this. Yeah, if you buy, you invest, I don't know how much it can buy, it can cost you a station like this one, but then you have a reduction on environmental impact, and you can announce in the world, say, well, my wine is produced with a lower environmental impact. Yeah. Well, you know more than me. I only know this. Sorry.
Are there processes ongoing that the private companies are not mandatory, but like it's voluntary, so they have an LCA cycle for the products, or is it always like coming from the university
academy? Well, with this boom of circular economy, yeah, we are benefiting a lot because circular economy you have to take into account the life cycle. Yeah, so the companies are trying to understand what this about. And I'm talking about most of the Portuguese culture, right? But normally the companies, the big ones, are starting to understand about. We are doing together with some big companies, shoemaking, tires making, LCAs, in order for them to understand what is that about. This is the middle range. They are the top companies. Unilever, they do this. On PepsiCo, they do this on a daily basis. And you have like the lower basis, no one knows what is that, they don't understand, and they don't understand why there is a need for that. So we are living in a time that they are really, the experience are the most different ones, and the interest on that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We really have to conclude. We have a present for you.
Very much.
Universidad de Extremadura.
Thank you very much. It will be very much appreciated.
Thank you. So I would like to thank all the speakers for their contribute and their very interesting presentations. So we are concluding now our second day and last day of lectures. In the afternoon we'll have the workshops, and tomorrow you will present the projects. Thank you very much for attending, and now we can go have lunch.